Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a brand new legal breaking reporting video analysis update. The Washington D.C. National Guard deployments are a focus of federal, of court hearings in D.C. and Portland. Let's get into this article by the New York Times. By Military Times. Ladies and gentlemen, the article is titled, Guard Deployments in D.C. and Portland are Focus of Court Hearings. Ladies and gentlemen, the article reads, the deployment of National Guard troops in Washington, D.C. faced a challenge in a court in the nation's capital Friday, while a judge in Portland, Oregon said she expects to rule by Monday on whether to let President Trump deploy and put troops. My editorial edition, ladies and gentlemen, on the streets. The hearings are the latest in a head-spinning array of lawsuits and overlapping rulings prompted by Trump's push to send the military into Democratic-run cities, despite fierce resistance from mayors and governors. Troop deployment remains blocked in the Chicago area, where all sides are waiting to see if the United States Supreme Court intervenes to allow it. Which, by all means, ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't expect them to allow it, given the recent rulings in the past and federal law saying that the president cannot use the National Guard or military as his own police force, or use them in general as a domestic law enforcement type of enforcement. Here's what to know about the latest legal efforts to block or delay the Guard in various cities. Ladies and gentlemen, a challenge to troops in Washington, D.C. U.S. District Judge Jaya, that's J-A-I-A, J-I-A, ladies and gentlemen, in case it pops up in the transcripts of the video as some weird spelling. It's actually spelled J-I-A. Cobb, an appointee of former President Joe Biden, was hearing arguments Friday on District of Columbia Attorney General Brian Schwab's request for an order that would remove more than 2,000 Guard members from Washington streets. In August, Trump issued an executive order declaring a crime emergency in the district, though the Department of Justice itself says violent crime there is at a 30-year low. Within a month, more than 2,300 Guard troops from 8 states and the district were patrolling under the Army Secretary's command. Trump also deployed hundreds of federal agents to assist them. It is unclear how long the deployments will last, but attorneys from Schwab's office said troops are likely to remain in Washington, D.C. through at least next summer. Quote, "Our constitutional democracy will never be the same if these occupations are permitted to stand," unquote. They wrote. Government lawyers said Congress empowered the president to control the D.C. National Guard's operation. They argued that Schwab's lawsuit is frivolous political stunt. A frivolous political stunt, ladies and gentlemen. Which, no, it's not. They have the right to sue despite them not being a state and being a district. That's what these dumb asses do not understand. Threatening to undermine a successful campaign to reduce violent crime in Washington. Though the emergency period ended in September, more than 2,200 troops remain. Several states told the Associated Press that they would bring their units home by November 30 unless extended. Ladies and gentlemen, judge continues hearing on West Virginia deployment. Among the states that sent troops to the District of Columbia, was West Virginia. A civic organization called the West Virginia Citizens Action Group says Governor Patrick Morrisey extended his authority by deploying 300 to 400 Guard members to support Trump's efforts there. Which is honestly illegal, ladies and gentlemen, because there is no crime. The crime statistics are at a 30-year low. The Department of Justice words, not mine. Ladies and gentlemen. Under state law, the groups argue the governor may deploy the National Guard out of state only for certain purposes, such as responding to a natural disaster or another state's request. Ladies and gentlemen, emergency request. Quote, "The governor cannot transform our citizen soldiers into a roving police force available at the whim of the ladies and gentlemen, of federal officials who bypass proper legal channels, unquote. The group's attorneys with the ACLU Union of West Virginia wrote in a court document. This is exactly right, ladies and gentlemen. Donald Trump is not doing this to crack down on crime. He's just showing his illegal authoritarian dictator grabs. AKA, he's showing a excessive illegal use of presidential power. Morrissey has said West Virginia is proud to stand with President Trump, and his office has said the deployment was authorized under federal law. The state attorney general's office has asked Kanawha, that is spelled Kanawha, unless, in case the transcripts spell it differently, ladies and gentlemen. You know how it's spelled. County Circuit Judge, Circuit Court Judge, ladies and gentlemen, Richard D. Lindsay, to reject the case, saying the group has not been harmed and lacks standing to challenge Morrissey's decision. They have every right to, ladies and gentlemen, challenge an unlawful decision, especially one that assists the president, the executive branch, because let's face it, is he really acting like a president? To assist the executive branch in their illegal activity. Lindsay heard some arguments Friday before continuing the hearing to November 3rd to give the state time to focus more on whether Morrissey, Morrisey, had the authority to deploy the National Guard members. Quote, I want that issue addressed, unquote, Lindsay said. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the troops in Oregon that remain in legal limbo. U.S. District Judge Karen Immergut, a Trump appointee in Portland, is in a tricky legal spot. She issued two temporary restraining orders earlier this month, prohibiting Trump from calling up Oregon troops to Portland and another blocking him from sending any Guard members to Oregon at all after he tried to evade the first order by deploying California National Guard troops instead. A 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals panel on Monday put the first ruling on hold, letting Trump take command of 200 Oregon National Guard troops. Now Immergut must decide whether to dissolve her second order. DOJ has insisted Immergut is required to immediately dissolve the second order. That is not true, ladies and gentlemen. She is not required to dissolve the second order, because its reasoning was the same as that rejected by the appeals panel. Attorneys for Oregon disagree, saying she must wait to see if the Ninth Circuit Court will reconsider the panel's ruling. By God as my witness, I hope she does. I hope they do reconsider this illegal ruling. Shout out to Judge Graber. You're an amazing judge. After hearing arguments Friday, Immergut said she would rule by Monday, if not sooner. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into Chicago, awaiting word from the Supreme Court. U.S. District Judge April Perry on Wednesday blocked guard deployments to the Chicago area until the case is decided in her court or the U.S. Supreme Court intervenes. Perry previously blocked the deployment for 2 weeks through a temporary restraining order. Attorneys representing the federal government said they would agree to extend the order, but would also continue pressing for an emergency order from the Supreme Court that would allow for the deployment. Lawyers representing Chicago and Illinois have asked the Supreme Court to continue to block the deployment, calling it a dramatic step. Ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for this legal breaking reporting video analysis update. If you did enjoy this legal breaking reporting video analysis update, please like, comment, share, subscribe, enjoy, follow for more legal breaking news that you need to know about. More to come soon.